At this point, I wanted to kick off the actual roundtable. I want to get the platforms much more involved now into the discussion, so let's do that. So the first topic...
Mark, did we want to do introductions?
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
But let's keep them, we got to keep them really quick.
So just your name, your title, and one sentence about what you guys do. That was a great point before. Tell us what you do, just one sentence. And maybe we'll start. And what we'll do is if you've already introduced yourself as a VC or a speaker, we'll skip you and we'll just move around. So let's start right here. We'll go all the way down. Again, we'll have the investors kind of skip and we'll go this way. So
sure.
You're up first.
Eric Chan, angel investor. I actually, before angel investing, I'm actually still involved with a company that's involved in the crowdsourcing space. So I actually do have some interesting questions since we're still involved in it to the panel and everyone in general. So hopefully good round.
So we're going to skip down a little bit to the gentleman in the blue. Oh, actually, no, we'll go here and then around. Thank you.
Yeah, Mike Stanley, Transit X. It's a mass transit system that hopefully will get all the workers to be able to guarantee times to all their different appointments.
I'm Jay. I'm a founder of Jude. We built the Instacart outlet shopping.
My name is Sal Casillas, and I'm here, the CEO of SwiftSell. We recently won a couple hackathons and now putting everything together in the team. And what we do is a peer-to-peer, all-inclusive e-commerce website with instant delivery.
Steve Plush, Transit X.
Karen Todd. I'm a six rideshare delivery driver right now. Lyft, Uber, Sidecar, Shuttle, Kangaroo, and Postmates.
That's a lot of work.
That's a lot of work, taxi time. But, yeah, so I guess I'm here as a voice of the people a little bit. Yeah, so I'm not a founder, but definitely a worker. So.
I'm Rachel Flores. I manage HR for Zerks. More about Zerks.
I'm Shmulik. I'm one of the co-founders of Zerks. I do ops and strategy for a day job. We're reinventing what it means to own a car. So starting with parking and then everything else sort of comes on as an accessory.
I'm Ron Mason, and I am the CEO of Tuple. Tuple is just basically a trust score for both providers and consumers in the shared economy space.
I'm Lynn Slew, the Managing Director of the Angels Forum, investment broadly across life sciences to consumer enterprise technology.
My name is Jake. I'm with Duai Commute. So we connect commuters to carpool on their own schedule.
My name is Mark Diamond. I'm with Shipbird.com. We're a crowdsourced delivery company, helping companies expand their distribution range.
My name is Micah Greenberg, CEO of LanguageZen. We're a language learning web app that uses machine learning to teach foreign languages more efficiently than anywhere else.
Ian McHenry, I'm co-founder of Beyond Pricing. We help individuals and property managers price their short-term and vacation rentals, giving them the same software that major hotels and airlines have, but simple enough to use for small businesses and individuals.
My name is Noah. I'm the founder and CEO of Feastly. So we're letting anyone find the best pop-up supper clubs, home dinners all around the world.
I'm Ricky Johnson with Hitch, and we're changing the way America uses the roadside assistance services on the highways and the streets.
I'm Miriam Sedman. I'm the CTO of Indiforce. It stands for Independent Workforce. We provide highly skilled workers from the Bay Area with a lot of startup experience to companies around.
Musa Zaid, I'm with Lyft, and I do operations strategy.
My name is Richard Harding. I'm CEO of ACP LLC. What we're attempting to do is build a high-tech billion-dollar resort in the Bahamas.
Somewhere where all the workers
can on-demand means, but
it's somewhere where all the workers. So since you work for 6 platforms, you have somewhere to go on vacation.
John Gillen, co-founder and CEO of Roost. We're a peer-to-peer marketplace for storage and parking spaces.
Sir?
Sandeep Brahmarutu. I'm working on a on-demand tech support startup.
I'm Kimberly Greenberg, community manager of Winolo, and we're an on-demand staffing company, although now I hesitate on using on-demand.
Don't change terminology on us. It's okay.
Sue Fisher, co-founder of eWalls Network. We enable digital wallets to cross-transact, so users could be able to send payments from one wallet to the next. For example, Google Wallet to PayPal.
Kevin Dorr, co-founder Archimedes Labs, incubator, angel fund in the Valley.
I'm Sandra Thumbtack. We connect you with people who help you accomplish any personal project. I've led a lot of our growth teams over the years.
Steve Silver, I work with Funding Post and also with Crowded.
Yeah. Ray Casberry, and we're an app company in Palo Alto. And the app that's coming out this month allows the person you're calling to put content on your phone before they answer. So Nicole, what do you?
I'm Alexander Navarro. I'm working with Lenovo as a temp.
So Jonathan Duarte again from Good Hire. We do background checks in the automated APIs for the on-demand society.
Mansur Deridal, I'm a tasker from TaskRabbit since 3 years. And I have 1,900 clients behind me. And just like kind of like, you guys talk always about like making money, but actually you don't put any numbers on it. And if you work hard, so I will end maybe this year with $125,000 on the 1099.
No.
So just like one number without just for like, you can make money with us. That is what you want, right?
So 1,900 clients?
1,900 completed tasks,
Wow.
because I have repeating clients too.
Not 1,099, huh?
No, 1,900. Over 1,000. And yeah, you guys want to make money with us, and actually you can make money with us. But yeah, let's talk later.
I'm Mark. We do private investments and based out of Hong Kong on behalf of Chinese firm. Hi, I'm Richard, and I'm on the technical advisory board to Deborah's company, Tuple.
Great. Mark, kick it off with your first topic of
Okay,
discussion.
so the first topic I want to talk about is something that's one of our favorites, worker acquisition. So strategies for, I want to hear about from the platforms, your strategies for worker acquisition, how much of an issue it is, and then a kind of a related topic, the onboarding that is associated with that, the onboarding process you go through, and in particular background checks and screening, and what kind of issues that presents to you.
And this is an open format, so everyone just say your name and company name again, and just jump in.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Just, I want to hear about your experiences with worker acquisition, essentially.
I'm happy to start it off. So, our worker acquisition is chefs. Those are everyone from your grandmother who makes the most amazing meatballs out of Italy, all the way up to, some of the biggest name chefs. We'll talk in San Francisco, Rag Mufang from Hagen Rocks, and some other kind of big names. So everyone in between. And what we're seeing is that there's a serious value proposition. So a lot of people are coming to us. So that's kind of one thing. As everyone here, I'm sure, knows one person who loves to cook, and you're probably like, oh, you should open a restaurant. But that's very difficult. It costs a lot of money, and your chances of success are very slow. I mean, very slim. That's why most people don't go into it. So that's one way. We also go out and we have methods to find the chefs that are maybe in between things or getting in the industry. So the chef or the restaurant industry is very kind of internal. They don't like a lot of outsiders. So you have to understand and know people within the industry to gain that trust. I mean, it's a very old school industry, just like the transportation industry and some other industries. So that's how we find them. It's both we have acquisition and they're also coming to us.
What about as far as the onboarding process?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing because, cooking food is not like driving or it's in the creative services. So I think a lot of people don't treat chefs as creatives. They treat them as service workers. That's not how we treat people. We treat them as creatives. So, we have a multi-stage process right now. Our main focus is San Francisco, where they fill out an online form. They come in for a tasting. We have a vetting call or a video. They come in for a tasting and a photo shoot. But one of the things we actually think about is like, what does that mean when we scale? You know, do we go with more the Uber model where we have a community manager in every city doing that, or do we go more like a Lyft model where the community is part of that vetting process? So we bring a team on and then they get paid to help that vetting process out. But at the end of the day, everything gets reviewed. So the community, the marketplace itself is always letting us know if we should keep these chefs on or not, or even if other people are going to purchase their meals because they have good or bad reviews.
I'd love to hear some stories from earlier in Thumbtack's history with growth.
Let's see, so...
Somebody get Sander a beer.
Yeah. So yeah, just like
Or
all
liquor.
you guys, we're a marketplace, so we had to build both supply and demand. And we spent the first 18 months of the company's life focused exclusively on building supply because we found that first, it was easier to acquire than supply and demand, and also it was a necessary hand to acquiring demand. So literally all anybody at the company worked on for the first 18 months was figuring out how to acquire pros, we call them, at our company at scale for low cost. And we built a lot of tools to build databases, contact information for all these people all over the country, and then we reached out to them in a variety of ways to sign them up. And we figured out how to do it at like scale for really low cost. I'm not gonna like go into every little detail about exactly what we did 7 years ago to do that. But we did get a cease and desist letter from Craigslist, so we were in good company with Airbnb. And then for the next 18 months, all we focused on was doing the same thing on the demand side. So all we focused on during that period was SEO. So like the dozen people at the company, that's like what we did, and we built our site architecture and content and link building strategy during that time. And then the pendulum swung back for the next 18 or 24 months to supply side. And since then, it's been like we've been heavily focused on signing up the supply side. We, like many of you guys, have like very specific supply acquisition needs in lots of geographies all across the country, and because we operate across so many verticals and all these different verticals, so like we have now scaled targeted acquisition methods using like paid online marketing of every kind you can imagine to say like, okay, we need dog walkers in Kansas City, we need DJs in Miami, we need house cleaners in Boston, and we do this like scaled marketing across all these online channels to acquire all these different service professionals all across the country. Is that good?
Yeah.
That's good.
Cool.
Anybody else is having?
So with Roost, it's kind of a bit of a different acquisition strategy for our workers, because our workers are hosts. We like to say that's the least effort job that one can have is to host storage spaces. Set it and forget it. So, you know, you could be a Lyft driver and a Roost host without any cannibalization. You could be an Airbnb host and a Roost host because you don't make any extra money off of, you know, that garage space or that shed out back. So, you know, our acquisition targets kind of mimic, you know, what everyone around these tables are doing for their on-demand workers, but, you know, we say, hey, tack this one on top, which is actually something that we should talk to you guys about Crowded, because it's just an easy, you know, extra piece that people can add to their pie. And then, interesting about the 18, 24 month supply demand swing, we actually do week by week supply demand. And every day we go through and have our hottest leads, like who's gonna freak out on Twitter if we don't, you know, get them a storage space now, who's gonna, you know, who are the people who are about to explode, and we prioritize by that, but it's week on week supply demand. And you know, we focused the first, you know, 6 months on supply, and by the time we started getting them the demand, they already forgot about us. So we realized that was a big mistake. Yeah.
Yeah, what we saw looking at, and the crazy number, I don't know if I mentioned in my research, is that we track over 400 on-demand platforms. So it's well beyond just the Lyfts, the Ubers, the Thumbtacks, the TaskRabbits, of the world. And across the board, there's this huge supply and demand imbalance, and it's just swinging from market to market and vertical to vertical. So it's kind of interesting, and you mentioned it. You spend a few months and then you jump back and forth, and it's never ending. And then we're just thinking about U.S. right now, and if we look internationally, it's a lot of similar issues.
To add to that, yes, it is an extreme balancing act to balance supply and demand, because if you have one and not the other, that causes a problem in your system, and you don't want that problem. But one way that is really big for Lyft to get supply is really word of mouth and using your community to get the friends and family and even member of the community. Because being a taxi service, a lot of people of the same community, probably immigrants, they refer each other to drive, and we've seen it in taxi cabs in New York, Boston, Seattle, anywhere. So the same paradigm also applies to ride sharing.
We do pricing for vacation rentals, Airbnbs and whatnot, and so we'll see kind of what happens when there's a spike in supply, for instance, of Airbnbs or HomeAways, VRBOs. And so like one question I have is, for the platforms where the price of the good, say like with Roost or with most of them, where the price of the good is, hey, you got demand for people to, get something delivered for $10, right? With the truly on-demand ones like Uber and Lyft, if you suddenly throw a bunch of supply in there, like you see for New Year's Eve, and you call in all this supply, and you probably have experience with this, everyone rushes in, and then as supply increases, then those promised 6Xs kind of like drop. And so for any of the people that have to deal with that, like how do you not oversupply the market? We see this with Airbnb, like the Pope came to Philadelphia, they recruited a ton of people to list their places, there was 4 times the number of units as usual, and like nobody got booked. Hotels were discounting, Airbnbs were discounting, all that.
There's that balancing act again.
There's a balancing act, but like how do you do that for the ones that, were bringing too much supply actually leads to the suppliers making less money?
I think experience really helps. When you do this for a long period of time, you kind of know how to anticipate demand. You become more intelligent about what kind of events are happening in the area, what we expect in terms of like uptick in supply or demand. And really, there are a lot of people working on figuring that out. It's just not one person. And I think it's a bit more challenging when you're a smaller company trying to achieve that and not have all that information.
Well, I was going to add that, the simple way is generally increase your standards, right? So you have a lot of supply, great, but is it high quality supply? Is it just, a room, right? So in my experience, what we did in the past is we just said, well, we'll make the task or the user qualification more stringent so that on the delivery end, the user is always satisfied with the result of the customer, right? Because that's something you can actually build as a feature to kind of have a dial to adjust that, right?
But there are two different types of supply. There's the short-term supply and the long-term supply. I think the quality comes in when you're looking at long-term. But if you need something like today or tomorrow because you're on demand, you really have to like boost those like bonuses between like certain hours.
The quick iterations on supply and demand focusing, helps us to focus on one of our key metrics, which is days vacant, which we want to get low as possible, because for storage, our transactions last 3 to 5 years. Once we make a marriage, it's done. So we don't have to worry about fluctuating times as much. So the quick iterations, the lowest listing to booking time, that makes everybody happy. And just,
So kind of continuing down the path of the life cycle of a worker. So the age-old adage, it's easier to keep a customer than to find a new customer, and cheaper, right? So same thing here. What are you guys doing to help with worker retention so that you don't have to continually spend money on acquiring new workers? And obviously, your quality is going to improve as well when you have a long-term worker base. So what kind of retention issues are you seeing, and what are you doing about it?
Chris,
Sure.
on that?
Yeah.
Oh, me? Hi. Karen.
Karen, how do you, in terms of retention, like, and loyalty also, you're on multiple platforms, like, how does one platform worry you to get your time? How do you trade off which one you're gonna do? You know, somewhat, sorry to twist it that way, but,
No, it's no, I totally
because,
understand.
you know, retention is like, you don't like, say I'm never gonna drive for Lyft again, you probably just devote your X hours towards one platform more than the other.
Right. And being a full-time driver as I am, it's really important to be multi-service, which is kind of it creates conflict of interest from the company standpoint, surely. But from a worker standpoint, like, you have to hustle, right? So, I've been driving for Lyft actually the longest since November of last year. So I started out with them, sort of like, and I sort of grew over time. I had a full-time job during portion of this year, so I became a part-time driver, and then with the flexibility, it's like you were saying, Howie, like as far as the what's most important is it really is true, like the flexibility and be able to turn the app on and off, work when you need to and when you're flexible to. It is really important, but there's also sort of a trade-off as far as, you know, accountability, I think, would be a better way to describe it, where, you know, when you're looking at a room of blank-faced millennials who don't know what 1099 is and probably don't even know that they need to be paying their taxes quarterly. You know, it's just
they had no idea. It was
right?
pretty scary.
And Schedule has no idea what Schedule C is. So I think there's a very lack of education in this space as far as the worker as well. You know, so I'm hoping really there's a lot of hopefully growth opportunity in supporting multi-service drivers, because even like back when I first started driving, you know, it was very taboo to be a multi-service driver. It was like, you know, oh, it's so tacky, like, you know, to not to be loyal. But now it's just, you know, the space is so flooded that, you know, really there's just no reason for downtime.
And how do you choose that during the day? Do you have certain shifts almost
Honestly,
that you
it
think
fluctuates.
about?
So with Shuttle and Kangaroo, which are the two ride sharing services that I work for kids, so it's to and from school, after school activities, those are pre-scheduled. So then I'll do that. I'll book the rides the day before, and then sort of have a structure as far as, okay, well now I'm not available with this, and then typically drive for Lyft, like between and then after, and then the weekends depending on how much I've made for that week. So it really is, you know, not being able to sort of like predict the income, it kind of, you know, sort of shapes the schedule based on that.
Sounds like a lot to manage.
It is a lot to manage, yeah.
Can I ask a question about that?
Sure.
So actually, I've been looking as a VC at the 1099 infrastructure space, meaning apps for people like you to track income and do your accounting and taxes, and like we were even looking at stuff that would sort of like smooth out the curve of income. And then I hear this over and over again, how hard it is to keep track of the expenses and just to know like what you can expense and what you can't. Are you finding any, like how do you find out about cool apps, or is there anything you're using that makes your job easier?
Yes, Sherpa Share, I'd say, is what I use for income tracking, now that they're doing mileage tracking as well. So a lot of drivers don't understand that all of their miles are deductible from the time they leave their house to the time they return to their house. As long as they're active on the app to accept rides. So it's just a lot, again, from a deduction standpoint, it's just a lot of, again, lack of education as in the space in general. But for me, like Sherpa Share, I think is what I usually use for income tracking, but they don't track all the services that I work for, so then it's like extra math and not so much of that. So then just honestly, like, I'm going to get a CPA, like I can't.
Do those companies,
myself.
do the companies you work for ever suggest or try, do they realize they have an issue with people that are working for them where they don't know this thing, that thing, this thing? Do they try to help at all?
I think that it's more, again, the space is so young that really is been mostly about like user acquisition from a customer standpoint and also driver standpoint. Like, yeah, come work for us and yeah, work for and everything. I think there is a lot of attention on that, but also, you know, from a training standpoint, you know, of course, you know, they want you to have their emblem and no other emblems and it's all these things. It's just in the reality when you're on the road, like you see my car right now, I have all my symbols up. I'm just like, hey, as long as everybody recognizes, you know, the mustache, you know, and it's okay. And honestly, riders don't mind. Like, they get it. You know, they congratulate me on, you know, hustling, like I said. So So it is definitely not something that I would say that's prioritized as far as the individual companies. And there could be more education on that side, definitely.
And there are more and more.
Actually, I wanted to build on Michelle's point, because you're starting to address something that I was hoping that we would talk about, fundraising and tips aside, was the actual friction points. So you're talking about the accounting part, and I think you mentioned healthcare in the presentation, but what are some of the other friction points that you guys are all running into? I mean, yeah, supply and demand, that's a natural one you're trying to create as a marketplace, but what are the other things that, you know, you're staying up late nights or not sleeping because of? Because that's actually how you get what you're talking about, is the unit economics to be manageable, or at least predictable, or for the worker to have that smoother income.
So what are the big issues for the on-demand platform?
Specifically on the friction, because that's really what you want to solve a lot of, right? I mean, even for driving, I mean, paying someone quicker, you know, can make a huge difference for their satisfaction.
And we just announced like instant payment,
Yeah.
so we
So,
pay
I mean,
them.
right.
And actually, let me actually add on to that. You know, what kind of lay-in is for you and the Lyft guy and Thumbtack and Xander and all that? What kind of educational, when a new employee comes onto a company, there's a lot of educational things that happen. Where a company gives you a lot of information and tells you that. When you come onto these platforms, are you getting any type of, is there any kind of educational information that any of these companies are providing to you?
Lyft should speak to that.
Well, no, that's what I'm saying.
There's a lot of legal issues with it. Zerks could talk about it. The minute you start training, it's well under 1099.
There's a fine line.
That's high variation.
Yeah, there's a fine line, and we try to walk it.
Someone has to, like.
That's actually
that's what I'm trying.
So when we finished the more qualitative part of our research, right? Because it's very important to like talk to people versus kind of these mass research studies. When we found this is an issue and we looked at why, and that's really a great point. It actually becomes a worker classification issue on how they're training. So that's it influences our product and resource kind of direction. So that's like we're thinking about like, well, we can provide a lot of training because we don't have a work classification issue. So there's other players in this.
And that's one of our focuses as an infrastructure support system to offer training for the platform.
Yeah, because it's for the work, and it could be generalized. It doesn't have to be brand specific. Because you're working with 6 different services. The child focused services are different. But if you look at the other more general services, your tips would be great for drivers in 10 different services, which is awesome.
So we're doing something interesting. Maybe you guys can tell me if we're like crossing that boundary of 1099 or not. For us, our deal hunters, we were really cautious about not telling them you can do this, and that. What we did instead is we built a community around them, so they can like talk amongst each other what they do, the best practices and things like that. Now, I don't know if that crosses the 1099 boundary as far as we're concerned, but we're providing that community environment for them.
So what are the top 3 expectations that you have from the company? In terms of, I mean, like so many things. Go to any of these employers, like what will make you stick to that one company? What's those 3 things? Is it giving you insurance or giving you the classification of a full-time employee or just sprucing up your price, or getting more volume? What is like the top 3 expectations you have?
Well, don't say employers, by the way. Be very careful. Platforms.
To be honest, and then if I could just speak briefly about the lawsuit that recently happened about an employee, independent contractor for Uber and other services. I don't think ultimately, and I think actually I read this regarding the representation for the drivers, is that their goal was not actually to become employees. It was to put attention on the fact that there's a hybrid that exists, and to try to get it changed, the laws changed and the designation changed from a federal level, which if that created a hybrid, like, hey, yes, you're a flexible worker, but you're also covered if something happens, and all the business expenses regarding that transaction, whether it be gas or, wear and tear or insurance, are also covered. then that's ultimately what, like now currently the way that it's structured, it is one or the other. It is very black and white. But if a gray could exist, that I would say that would be the number one, and then it would be covered.
There's been a
then,
lot of
because-
discussion about a third worker class.
That seems to be the consensus of,
Yeah.
as to where things are going, but that's gonna take years.
Yeah.
Like,
It's
it
gonna
has-
take- it's gonna take more than the term of the
Well,
next.
look,
Canadian model.
well, everybody has to understand, I mean, you realize, kind of like, in the last, century when we transformed our economy from the horse and buggy to the horseless carriage, it takes years for legislation, for the laws to catch up to the technology that that we invent. And this is that happened in the last millennium. That's happening in this millennium. And it took until the horseless carriage. People forget that when the horseless carriage came on, there were whole industries that got destroyed. The buggy, the whip industry that we were calling, people, they, just like the taxi industry is concerned. Well, that whole industry was concerned. People who made the carriages for the horseshoes. So that tons of industries got wiped out. But by the same token, they had to create roads. You had to create stoplights. You had to create all these things, and it took years and years and years to make these to make these laws, to make these classifications, to understand that their employees. It took until the 1930s for there to be unions that were recognized. By the way, we grow up today thinking unions are normal. Well, less than 100 years ago, there weren't unions 100 years ago. Or if there were very few. I mean, so understand that laws take a long time to catch up to what's going on.
Are there any platforms here that are currently hiring workers under W-2? Anybody?
I'll speak briefly. We used to do property management for short-term rentals, so we would have a team of cleaners, and they were all W-2s. We needed the consistency in their schedule.
So for everybody else then, who's under 1099, have you considered W-2? Do you think it would help in quality of the worker, retention of the worker? Or is it just out of the question because your business model couldn't support it?
Well, so I don't want a W-2. I love my 1099 because
Right.
the word thing, what you said about freedom, is that what counts for me?
Right. And we've heard this a lot from workers, this exact comment.
So that is really, I want my freedom and I want my independency. And you asked like, what do you expect from a platform? I would first expect efficiency. When I'm with Tashberg now for 3 years, and I always go with them, talk to them. They ask me, hey, Mike, so what do you think about these? What do you think about that? And when I see on my app hearts appears, I say, I don't need hearts. I need efficiency from you guys as a platform, okay? And it's on our side, guys, we have to pay a fee to the platform. The question is like, is the fee somehow representable? Is the fee fair? Or is the fee a portion where I pay 25 people sitting there and thinking about hearts on a platform? Or what are you guys doing with the money that I earn? And one thing, guys, the platform providers, you have to always see, we are the people who bring the money. You guys are providing the platform, that's true. And we're using you, but you need us. Otherwise, without us, you don't have a product. So, and when you think about like training people, and training people in a way like, when I'm training people, then we run into the issue, it's not a 1099 anymore. But well, okay, I get that a little bit. But on the other side, if you guys give us guidance, like a handbook, that we can look into it, that we can read. That is not training. That's just a blog post.
Handbook could be employed.
But that's the whole point. And that's the whole point about it, is that this whole thing about where that whole line and where the laws have to catch up to create this this balance, because where if you can get this true efficiency, because millennials, everybody wants to have their freedom and wants to, but you need to have some guidance. You can't just get on a platform and just be said, here you go, start driving. I mean, that's, it just, to get here today, I had the lucky experience, and I used Uber, but I had the lucky experience of the first ride. It was the guy's first drive, and he went the wrong, he couldn't get me here. Yeah, it was very interesting. So,
And the average worker's been there less than 2 weeks.
But,
on most of ours.
that's because he had no training. I mean, he didn't know how to even use the app. He's like, I'm using Waze to try. I'm like, well, why are you on? I mean, like, I don't understand that. I had to give him. I had to go on and direct him to get here.
We only got a few minutes left. I'd like to try to cover one more thing before
I'm sorry,
we wrap up.
Just on the regulatory front, so when I was doing the econ studies at Caltech, we were steeped into what's now the whole Freakonomics trend and all this stuff. And on the regulatory side, I am positive that a lot of the reason these businesses exist and have grown up is because enterprises wouldn't touch them because parts of them are quite illegal. And they're in these gray areas that a giant company is not going to risk tripping into because they will be targeted immediately. And now as these companies have gotten bigger, a lot of that blowback has come. So I'm particularly curious to see if this worker classification changes. The big enterprises they're gonna take advantage of that too. So some of the ways in which these smaller companies are able to do more efficient things will go over time. A lot of these classifications today came out of what Microsoft was doing when they were doing independent contractors, right? So these rules came from how big enterprises were behaving. If the rules change, big enterprises will change how they behave and be mindful as these smaller companies. It's not that you can't beat them, of course you can, but don't expect them to not respond. So.
Okay, one last topic before we wrap for the platforms about regional expansion, fragmentation, rolling out new cities. What's your experience? Have you done it too fast? Have you done it not fast enough? What are the issues you had when you want to expand to a new city?
Can I flip that as a question? So, I mean, we are focused on San Francisco and building out that model. I think that a lot of platforms want to be everywhere all at once because a few people here say, a few people there, and you're excited and you're feeling pressure, etc. But I would say, for us, the big thing is really focus on a market, understand your model, understand your levers, just really understand the whole business on both sides of it. It's already complicated.
Right. Proceed with caution.
Yeah. But one of the things, you hear a lot is that, and this is just towards the investors, there seems like there are two theories around this, where it's like, they want to see you then take that and go to another market before they give you capital to expand markets. And then some other people are like, well, no, we want you, what I would think is probably the more traditional way, which is really understand it here, be able to be okay, here's going to be our launch strategy, and that's part of the series, that's an A investment. So I would love to hear any thoughts on that, because it's just there's so many differing opinions and theses.
We want you to focus in a huge way.
Yeah.
I'll say two cons, and there's a pro and a con to going outside of Bay Area. One, the Bay Area is not like other places, right? So when I see a company that's just launched in New York and San Francisco, I'm like, okay, but is this going to work in Houston and in Atlanta and Charlotte and Chicago? Are people here are very open to trying things. People love downloading the newest app. So I'm worried it's too easy here in many ways.
This is Airbnb's 25th largest market. So
right.
When we say that they're also elementary, you can see that it's not that big compared to other markets.
Yeah, and there's there's a lot of different elements here, and the density and the traffic. We want to know can this work in other places where there isn't this density? Because when you start thinking about someone having to drive in LA or in Charlotte or something an hour between, then what do the unit economics look like? So that's one pro for going into a different location. And then I love to see a strategic location, not just and we did it in New York because our co-founder wants to be there for her boyfriend. And then but the con side of that is we've seen companies that clearly have just scraped all the easy low-hanging fruit in a bunch of locations. They use Google AdWords and they just get all that on-demand lawn care in like all these different places, and they show these crazy metrics that look so good, but we just have a feeling that they're like sweeping up everything that's easy and not necessarily like really going after what's hard and picking a location and showing they can really grow there. So, pro con.
So no answer.
Oh, no, I would say like be strategic about it. Like maybe pick a couple locations, like really own one. It doesn't have to be San Francisco. Like one that's especially representative of more of the US, I think would be
Yeah, so prove
a better
something
one.
outside of San Francisco.
So you're for the prove, go to another market, launch it before the Series A.
It depends what your goal is as a company, and not every company needs to become $1 billion unicorn, right? And like the more funding you take on, the more pressure there is to get there, right? But like there's so many businesses I look at where I'm like, I would love to be an owner of this business, but I don't want to be an investor in this business. Like you can have a great $50 million outcome, and if you haven't taken on a bunch of venture funding, that's awesome for you. That's like life-changing for people. But once you start getting those like 10, 15, $20 million checks, it's a whole different level of expectations. And then you need to prove that you can go mass market. You're not going to build $1 billion business just doing on-demand in San Francisco.
All right. I think that's about what we have time for.
Yeah, excellent. Mark, thank you very much for heading this up, the roundtable discussion. I wanted to thank the two workers for coming
I
and
know.
actually
Yeah.
giving some amazing advice to the platforms that you are. As Mark and Howie mentioned, we're working with a lot of you guys as far as platforms. If we're not already working with you or starting to work with you, please come speak to us. We'd love to sit down and talk. To all the investors and VCs in the room, we're going to be coming and asking you for some advice early next year. And thank you so much for all of the advice that you've given today. And again, thank you to our sponsors at Crowded.com, Shepard Mullen. Thank you guys so much. All right.